all you heroes and champions, crows, pirates, and inquisitors. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast. I'm Shelby.
And I'm Austin.
And we are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode, we'll be talking about a different topic in the Dragon Age universe. From the Maker to Lyrium to Aravels, we will cover it all. There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
Hey, Shelby.
Hey, Austin.
How's it going?
Pretty good, because today we have a guest with us.
We do.
We have FyreWriter from the Pixel People with us.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
We are so excited. Yeah, we're so excited to have you.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So when we started the podcast, both Shelby and I kind of did an overview of like what got us into Dragon Age. And so if you want to just talk about what your experience with the games and
Sure.
what hooked you into the game, I guess.
So Dragon Age is a funny one because I first tried it, I don't know, years ago. I don't even know how many years ago. And I immediately bounced off of it and decided it wasn't for me. It was Origins that I tried, and the mechanics threw me for a complete loop. And I was just like, this game sucks. How does anybody play it? I don't understand it. Blah, 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 blah. And so fast forward however many years. And so I started the podcast. And immediately, I had people requesting characters from a bunch of games I hadn't played, and Dragon Age was one of those games. And I knew that Dragon Age was a very character-heavy game, and a lot of the same people who really loved it were people who loved other games that I was really into. So I was like, okay, we're going to try this again. So to make things extra hard for me, I decided to go ahead and try it on stream so I could embarrass myself in front of everybody, because, what better way to get accustomed to a game. That actually, it wound up being the best thing I could have done, because I wound up getting a lot of help and people cheering me on while I was trying to figure out the mechanics, and offering a lot of great advice and encouraging me to turn down the difficulty level and not be embarrassed to do so. And which I think was probably the best piece of advice I was given. And I wound up absolutely loving it. And I was so glad that I did. I have yet to play the next one. It is in line. I'm currently finishing up a playthrough of Mass Effect Legendary Edition. And then Dragon Age 2 is next on the docket in the BioWare slot on my stream. So I'm looking forward to getting back into that universe and learning more about, more of the great characters that are hanging out in there. Plus, I've got a lot of folks who want to talk about characters who are further down in the series, and I want to be ready for that.
I can imagine that people are probably DMing you every day wanting you to talk about Varric.
I'm trying to think, do I have Varric? I do have Varric on my list. You are correct. I can't remember who asked for it, but I do remember he is on my list. So
yeah,
we'll get there.
He's a really good one.
So hopefully in season 2.
All right. So Shelby, what are we talking about today?
Well, today we are continuing our Countries of Thedas series. So we have already talked about Tevinter and Orlais so far in the series. And we did those two first because they're kind of the oldest human countries, at least, in the series. So today we're transitioning to Ferelden, which Ferelden is actually technically the youngest kingdom in Thedas, so we're going all the way to the other spectrum. But I think that's more due to like the Orlesian occupation of Ferelden, which, we get that a little bit in Origins. So yeah, we're starting with Ferelden. I'm excited because I think if I lived in Thedas, I would probably be a Ferelden. Like, that's just my personality. I think I would fit well in Ferelden. So
That's so funny because I always say that I would fit in the Free Marches. like I think I would be happy there, which is funny because my favorite game is Dragon Age 2 and yours is Origins.
Yeah, and that's where those are set. So okay, so I have my little fun facts about Ferelden. The capital is Denerim, which we go to in Origins. We get to see all kinds of the city. And I will say the first time I played Origins, I had no idea that there were like other parts of the city that you could go to, like other than the marketplace. Like obviously there's the place of the Black Pearl or whatever it's called. But I had no idea there are all these little alleys and other things that you could go to. I just had no idea that was a thing that existed at all in the game. So on my subsequent playthroughs, I explored the rest of the city a little bit more. So that was a fun little excursion for me. But anyways, so the Ferelden government is set up like a feudal monarchy. Like last week we talked about Orlais is an absolute monarchy, which is just like, you know, the emperor or empress holds all the power. But not really the same in Ferelden. Like they do have a king or queen, and we can meet some of them. But it's much more feudal. Like the rest of Ferelden is ruled in that kind of feudal system with earls and bands and all these kind of titles. And we'll get into more of that later. So the ruler of Ferelden right now is conditional, depending on your actions in the Landsmeet. So it can either be Alistair Theron, it can be Honora Mactyr Theron, or it can be both Alistair and Honora, or it can be the hero of Ferelden. I think those are the only options.
So Fire, which did you choose in your playthrough?
So, I wound up giving the crown to Honora, because I was trying to keep Alistair for myself.
Yeah, that's fair.
There were definitely very selfish motivations driving my behaviors in this game.
Well, what race and class is your character?
Excuse me. So she is a Dalish. She is from the forests. I forget what the exact term for that is. And she was a warrior. Yeah, she was a dual-handed warrior.
Nice. Yeah, so you don't really get the happiest of endings, I think.
Well, if
you put him on the throne.
I was able to push through and convince him, so we did get our happy ever after. With a lot of advice from the wonderful people in my stream who helped guide my decision making, knowing what I wanted my outcome to be.
Yeah, the first time I played, I screwed it up because I thought that the strategic thing to do would be to make Loghain another Grey Warden, so you could have another one. So you could have another one to fight the Archdemon. Ouch. And I went into it blind. I had no idea any of the outcomes. Yeah. I didn't even know that was a thing, really. So I was just thinking, literally in terms of practical, how can we get the most chances of winning against this Archdemon, right? And he leaves the party, and I was crushed because right before that, I had the scene with Zevran when his friend Taliesin comes back and tries to convince him to go back to the Crows, and apparently we didn't have high enough friendship, and he left too. I had to kill him, and so I was just really heartbroken.
It was so funny when I was going into, the Landsmeet and everything. A particular friend of mine who was really my main guide throughout this, shout out to the Rancid Dwarf, gotta give it to them. They know this game inside and out. And they were just constantly like, do not let Loghain live. Do not let Alistair kill him. Do not. I'm, okay.
Yeah.
I hear you.
Yeah. Okay, so are we ready to talk about like the ancient history of Ferelden?
Yeah.
I always nerd out on this. So in our previous episodes about Tevinter and Orlais, we talked a lot about how like those countries formed because the humans that lived there, they lived in like tribal societies, right? And then basically the tribes, for whatever reason, many of them combine. They start combining. And that's also true in Ferelden. So Ferelden was first settled by the Alamari tribes, which the Alamari tribes are the tribes that Andraste and her family come from. But King Calenhad is really the one who unites all of these clans like permanently. And that happens about 400 years before Origins. But Ferelden was first settled when the Alamari split from one of the Tevinter tribes, and they kind of like come down across the continent into across the Frostback Mountains and into the valleys. And like the Alamari tribes are like they are Ferelden, right? Like so much of their culture is just copy and pasted into who Ferelden is today. And I think that that's really important because it's not the same in the other countries. Like in Orlais and Tevinter, it's very much a melding, but in Ferelden, it's the Alamari culture. And I think that's important. So the Alamari also developed the political system of Ferelden, which is again mostly intact in modern Ferelden, and we'll talk about that later because it's kind of weird and complicated, and there are so many names like Arls, Arlesas, Bands, Terniers, all of those things. Like I was so confused what all of those things mean for a very long time. So we'll talk about that later. But to go back to King Calenhad is the first Theron. He is the great whatever grandfather of Alistair and Kaelin. And he actually was not any kind of royalty or nobility coming up. He was actually the son of a merchant, and he became a servant to someone who was a candidate for the throne of Ferelden. So Calenhad works for this guy, is very respected by him, and eventually he married his master's daughter, and through that became a noble. And then eventually he became a Terran, and eventually through a landsmeet he became Ferelden's greatest king. So those are kind of the events that lead up to the founding of Ferelden. And I think the games, there are so many codex entries about King Calenhad, and like Arl Eamon, who I get annoyed with, he talks so much about this bloodline. Like, we can't abandon the Theron bloodline. Alistair needs to sit on the throne. There needs to be a Theron on the throne. And that goes back to King Calenhad. It's been this way for 400 years, and that's pretty significant.
Well, and there's Andraste, too.
Well, she wasn't king or queen, though.
Right, but big role in she is Ferelden.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like, there's only two. Like, they're the two biggest people from Ferelden. Like, they're the two biggest heroes and leaders. And I mean, I guess you have Maferath, her husband, but he's, like, reviled. Like, he's hated. And I guess, of course, you have now the hero of Ferelden. But I feel like all these other countries have so many more leaders and people they look up to and rulers and all these people. And Ferelden just has a couple. And I guess that's because they're newer. They're younger than the others. But yes. So let's transition a little bit into some major events in Ferelden history. So, first, the Grey Warden Rebellion.
I do have
So
a
if you-
question.
Yeah.
Fire, did you play all the DLCs for Dragon Age Origin 2?
Oh, for let's see. I know I played some of them. Like I played let me think. I played Soldier's Peak. I played the one that goes into the deep. And I played Liliana's Song. If there's more, I can't remember. Or they were just mixed right in, and I didn't realize I was
That's
playing
true.
Yeah,
DLC
there
at the time.
are so many DLCs for that game. Like, so many.
Yeah. So I probably did play more, and because I had them all, so I just don't know which ones. Because I'd never played base game, so I don't know.
Did you get Shale in your party? Okay, so
Yes,
Shale is from a
I
DLC,
did.
and I love Shale. Hilarious.
She's wonderful.
Hilarious.
Oh my gosh, so funny. I think of her whenever I see
Yes.
a picture.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Soldier's Peak is super important because we're going to talk about that. So the Soldier's Peak DLC gives us such an insight into the Grey Warden Rebellion. Like, we hear about that. I think it's mentioned in several places. I'm not sure, but we get to see it basically play out in that DLC. So really the story starts with a dispute over the throne of Ferelden, which, like, isn't that always how rebellions start? I feel like. But one of the Theron kings died without an heir, similar to Kaelin, throwing the country into just like chaos. So Arland Theron, King Arland, and Sophia Dryden both had claims to the throne. They're both descended from the Theron line, even though Sophia has a different last name. She was like a cousin to the direct line, not necessarily like a direct descendant of the previous king. But she still had a claim because she was really respected in Ferelden. And as we know, if you've played that DLC, she does not become the ruler of Ferelden. But she was really respected by the people, and instead of being killed, because they didn't want to just kill her outright because she was so respected, they sent her to the Grey Wardens of Ferelden, hoping that, okay, she can become a leader here. She will not be such a threat to the throne anymore. And for a while, she does do that. She does improve the order. She becomes a great warrior and continues to be very respected. But fast forward a few years, King Arland becomes kind of cruel and even maniacal, which turns a lot of the Fereldans against him. And so Sophia, of course, makes a comeback and is plotting a rebellion. So in the DLC, we see the last remnants of her rebellion. And the result of Sophia's actions is that the Grey Wardens get expelled from the country for over 200 years, until King Merrick, Alistair's dad, brings them back. So she's a really interesting character to me, mostly because we see her as a ghoul. I think she's a ghoul.
Yeah.
Which is just creepy. Gives me the, I don't know what the word is, but again, I always love female characters that are not like the goody-goody two-shoes kind of character. I really appreciate when they make evil female characters, just because I feel like there are lots of women characters out there that are that kind of stereotypical, or like, oh, you're a good person. So I feel like evil female characters are always interesting. And I think that Sophia is definitely one of them.
I think that this whole era of Ferelden history really sets up, like, because I always thought it strange how, like, little help you get as a Grey Warden in Origins.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, you're supposed to be these fabled heroes that, you know, have defeated 4 blights before this, and everyone is just kind of like, ew, you're a Grey Warden. And I just get that. Like, you get that a little bit, like, when there's these mythical things, like if we take the Jedi, for example, like, there are people who are like, oh, I don't want this involvement of the Jedi. But generally, most of the galaxy in Star Wars looks at the Jedi and says, oh, they're good, they're helpful. And so I was always weirded out by why the Grey Wardens were so reviled, I guess, in Ferelden.
Yeah.
And why they were so quick to believe that Logain's story that they betrayed King Caitlin on battlefield. Another thing. But when you learn this, you're like, oh, there's a history of Grey Wardens inciting rebellion in Ferelden.
Yeah. And being treacherous. Like, it makes sense. It makes sense. And also, I think, for some people, depending on the origin you've chosen, the first Grey Warden you meet is Duncan, who can be kind of a jerk. Like, I know a lot of people hate him. I don't necessarily hate him because I've played most of the origins, and I think he can be a good guy in some of them. But it's just interesting. Like, he's the first one you meet. He's a gray character. We'll leave him in the gray. And I don't know. It seems like he has a lot of connections, but you know, and the only other Grey Wardens you meet in that game are your companions, and Riordan, is that his name at the very end? And then he dies.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, well, I mean, the game's been out for like 15 years, right?
Oh, you bet. There's going to be someone in a review. It's going to be like, spoilers.
Yeah. Well, our intro has the fact that there will be spoilers, so true. They were warned.
We're warned, yes.
Anyway.
Smart choice.
Okay, so the Grey Warden Rebellion, yeah. Any other thoughts about Grey Wardens? Do y'all have a favorite Grey Warden?
I guess I'll have to stick with Alistair.
That's fair.
Yeah, I was going to say Alistair. I like Stroud in Dragon Age 2, but not Inquisition.
I'm surprised you didn't say Bethany as your favorite Grey Warden.
Oh, that's true.
You love her.
I do love her.
Yeah.
And I think she makes a really good Grey Warden. But that's a conditional.
That's true.
Thing. Like, Stroud and Alistair are Grey Wardens no matter what you do, really. Even if Alistair is king, he's still like, okay.
That's true.
That's my thing. Like, what if Alistair is king? This is off topic. Alistair is king, got the calling. Like, that seems like not a great thing.
Well, that's why he has heirs.
That's true.
So, but my favorite Grey Warden is not a Grey Warden. Because my favorite Grey Warden is Blackwall and Fire. That he's in Inquisition, and spoiler, he pretends to be a Grey Warden.
Tricky.
Which is problematic. But
depending on your choices, though, he could be.
That's true. He could become one. I really just love his story of redemption. I mean, I'm a sap, so that's why I love him.
I love a good redemption arc.
Well, when you get to Inquisition, you will like him. Okay, Grey Wardens.
So, just one thing.
Yeah.
What was your first impression of like the order of Grey Wardens when you were like first playing the game?
So I agree with what you had said earlier. Because I was kind of coming into it, pretty blind. And I found that really confusing too, that they were kind of set up to be big heroes, except that they were kind of not. and I couldn't quite get a feel for are we the good guys or are we not the good? I just couldn't tell. So that was very confusing at the beginning, and in a way I kind of liked that it was confusing, because things aren't black and white, in the real world, and sometimes there are questions about, it's like, is that really the right? I don't know. And what you were saying about Duncan, I think, is really true too, where initially I felt like he was set up to be, oh, this is going to be my mentor. Wait, no, what are you doing? What you doing there, Duncan? So there was those first, few scenes, I guess, once you complete the origin and get into the main part of the game, there was a lot of like whiplash moments that were actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
I appreciated that.
Yeah, I think they do a really good job of like keeping you on your toes, especially in that game and in Inquisition
for sure.
Because there are just so many like twists and turns that I never expected, and usually I'm really good at like, okay, well, this is what's going to happen next because I pay attention to the foreshadowing and all that, but not in Origins. Not in Origins.
I was surprised when Duncan kills the other guy. That always struck me as like extreme. Like, okay, he doesn't want to be a Grey Warden. Why's he gotta die? Like,
yeah,
that was that moment where I was like, no, wait, what just happened?
Yeah.
You don't want to drink Darkspawn blood.
Well, it's not just Darkspawn blood. It's Darkspawn blood and Archdemon blood.
Yeah.
Which is even worse.
You don't want to drink that.
Gnarly.
You don't want to drink that, so now you have to die.
Yeah. Well,
seems like an unfair choice.
In the book The Calling, you get to know Duncan a lot more, and he's very much presented as this like young rogue jackass, like he's a thief. And he becomes a Grey Warden because the person he stole from and killed was also a Grey Warden, I think. And anyways, so you get a much more interesting picture of him. Like, yeah, he is a jerk. And I think he's supposed to be in that book because he's also a kid, he's like a teenager. So there's just a lot more backstory to him in that book that I appreciated. And then he goes into the Deep Roads with Merrick and other Grey Wardens and just kind of gets his butt kicked. So, the books are fun. I like them.
That's a great reminder. I do need to read the books. It's been on my list and I've been dawdling, but
yeah,
I need to read the ones like through Origins and then not any further.
Yes.
But I do want to.
I haven't read them either, so
every episode I get on here and I say, you should really read the book. This book is really good. Literally every time. So, Austin, I'm surprised you have not actually read them yet.
See, I need to get them on audiobook.
Yeah,
that's how I'm going to actually read them.
That's true. Well, anyway. We'll go, what?
Grad school destroyed reading for me.
Yes. Yeah, that's real.
Aww.
That's real. But we're not in grad school anymore, so you can get back into reading.
That's true.
Okay, so do we want to move to the Orlesian occupation?
Yes.
So we started talking about this in last week's episode on Orlais because they were the colonizers, the conquerors of Ferelden. But tonight I want to talk about this from Ferelden's perspective. So Ferelden was invaded by Orlais in the 8th Age, the Blessed Age, under the order of the Mad Emperor Reveal, I think that's how you pronounce that, of Orlais. So Ferelden, obviously they didn't just roll over, like they're pretty tough, but they are also poorer than the Orlesians, and they don't have this massive, well-trained military force, the Chevalier, like Orlais has. So after 20 years of fighting, they are fully conquered by Orlais. And so the Therans, who, again, we've already talked about Calenhad. They've been on the throne since Calenhad. But the Therans were forced into hiding. And so at this time, the only Therans that are alive are the future King Merrick, who is the father of Alistair, and his mother, who is known as the Rebel Queen, and her first name is Moira. And so we get a little bit of their story, actually a lot of their story in the book, The Stolen Throne. And I love that one because you get to know Loghain so much better. And at first I was really mad because I didn't want to feel sympathy for Loghain because I hate him. But It was so good, and I wasn't expecting it. And I still get really frustrated with Logain, of course. But just the character development of Logain and Merrick, but of Logain is just phenomenal in this book, and so I love that. But I'll get into Logain in a second. So Merrick and his mom are in hiding. They go into hiding, when they first start coming into Ferelden. So they're running around, they're plotting behind the scenes, trying to lead this rebellion, trying to fight back against Orlais. And pretty soon into the book, spoiler alert, the rebel queen is betrayed by a few of her supporters. And I see that moment as the start of the comeback of the rebellion, even though it totally seems like the opposite. It seems like, okay, the rebellion is dead. The rebel queen is no longer alive. There's no way she can lead us. There's no way this teenage boy, Merrick, can lead us. So when she's killed, the Orlesian noble Megrin is installed as the king of Ferelden during this time. And so when the rebel queen is killed, Merrick barely escapes, like by the skin of his teeth. And he is just sprinting, like running through the woods in Ferelden, trying to get away from these people. He really has no weapons. He doesn't have any provisions. He probably didn't even have the right armor, right, like clothes, all that kind of stuff. But he meets a young hunter/spy, and this person is Logain. And Logain helps Merrick, as he's obviously injured, without a weapon, all that kind of stuff. And so at this point in time, Logain's father, his name is Gareth, is basically running this like refugee camp almost, and like home for outlaws for all of the Fereldans who refuse to submit to the Orlesian rule. And he's running this camp for a couple different reasons. Number one, Logain's dad refused to pay taxes to the Orlesians because he didn't recognize them as having authority. And then number two, this is a big trigger warning for sexual violence. Number two, the Orlesians had killed and raped Logain's mom, Gareth's wife. And so Logain witnesses all of this, which is horrific, and I think really impacts who he is as a person, and in some of his probably paranoia, as we see later in the games. So after Logain's mom dies, his dad disappears for 3 days. Like, nobody knows where he is. Nobody knows if he's coming back. Nobody went with him. Nobody has any idea. So what he did is that he went to murder the Orlesian commander who killed his wife. So clearly, after this happens, they have to live on the run. Like, they can't just go into town anymore. So when Logain discovers Merrick running through the woods, he doesn't realize who he is at first. And he invites Merrick back to this camp. And ultimately, the Orlesians catch up to them. And Logain's dad charges Logain with protecting Merrick and making sure that he gets on the throne again, making sure that the Orlesians get ousted from their country. And so eventually Logain manages somehow, by the grace of the Maker, to get King Merrick to Arl Garen, not Arl Eamon Garen, but Arl Rendorn Garen, who is Eamon's father. And he later joins the rebel army, and Logain is back with his people. And so they continue fighting against the Orlesians. Logain becomes one of Merrick's best friends, as well as a key military advisor of the rebels. And his strategies, and really his creation of this like guerrilla little force called the Night Elves, is responsible for turning the tide of the war and the occupation of Ferelden. So if you're interested in more of this story, you can check out and read The Stolen Throne. I really recommend it if you're interested in learning more about either the Theron family or Logain, because it's really interesting. So Ferelden eventually is freed through the efforts of Logain, Merrick, and Rowan Garin, who is the older sister of Eamon. And Rowan is also engaged to Merrick, so that's another fun fact. But she's also an awesome warrior, which I love. So they muster the remaining rebels against the Orlesians, and a large number of Orlesian forces are defeated at the Battle of River Dane, which forces the Emperor and Orlais to withdraw all support for Megran. So eventually what happens is Megran and his court flee to Fort Draken, and Merrick challenges Megran to a duel and kills him in single combat, which is so Ferelden, I think. And so that ends his rule, obviously, and ends the Orlesian occupation. And Merrick then marries Rowan and starts to rebuild Ferelden. So that's a little bit of the Orlesian occupation and how Merrick gets back on the throne. And during this time, another little fun complication is that Logain and Rowan fall in love with each other while Rowan and Merrick are engaged to be married. And they've been like intended since they were kids, you know, like that's how noble families work, I guess. But Logain and Rowan fall in love, and so that definitely complicates Logain and Merrick's relationship, especially after she dies. She dies pretty young. So I think Logain in Origins is just this gruff jerk. He's this military leader who's super paranoid, and I mean, he's almost painted as crazy, I think. But in this book, I think we get a little bit more understanding of why he is the way he is, because he's seen horrible things throughout these wars. His whole life has been war. So, of course, he is choosing to act in ways that he thinks are preventing more war, even if it's not really doing that. That's what he thinks he's doing. So that's a little bit about Logain and the occupation.
I think that that really sheds light into Logain's motivations. I think without that, you don't really understand. The game itself doesn't paint a really good picture of like why Logain is doing what he does, other than that Ferelden hates Orlais.
Right.
Like that's really the only motivation you get. Otherwise, he's just kind of painted as like this power-hungry guy who wants the throne. And I think that gets a lot of motivation for why he is so enraged when he learned. So one of the reasons that he does end up betraying Kaelin and he's pissed at Kaelin is Kaelin and Selene have been having correspondence about how to fight the Blight together. And Logain is just pissed beyond all belief that Kaelin would even consider working with Orlesians, which makes sense. You know, they killed and raped his mother, and did all kinds of terrible things. Like they're the boogeymen of his life. But I think really like what is Logain's downfall is that he's so willing to kill the child of this woman who he claimed he loved.
You mean Kaelin, or do you mean Alistair?
Both.
Yeah.
Well, Alistair is not.
Oh,
Rowan's
that's
child.
true. You're right. That's right.
Yeah.
But he's still the child of his best friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
But it's a little more sympathy for understanding that, like, he's not really sure that it's a blight. First of all, at Ostagar, there hasn't been an archdemon. No one knows it's a blight yet. There's just, Duncan saying basically this is a blight. And then this combat with the Orlesians and everything like that, and then he kind of views Kaelin as weak, which Kaelin is weak in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. What do you think about Logain, Fire?
I think that this is all really interesting because, I didn't know all of this backstory, and he was very much painted in the game as, hey, this is your bad guy just because this is your bad guy, you know what I mean? Right. And, I love a complicated, somewhat sympathetic villain, and I really appreciate all of this extra backstory. I'll definitely be reading that book.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's so funny because I really appreciated this book, but I hate having a sympathetic villain because which just sounds so weird, but my life, our lives, everyone's life is so much living in the gray. Like we can't live in black and white. People are complicated. Right. Humans are complicated. Very few people are ever 100% good and 100% bad. Like that's just not how humans work, right? So in my life, I really try to understand people. That's a lot of what I do for work. And so whenever I watch a movie or play a video game or watch TV, I don't want to have sympathy for like the villain again because I'm trying to find sympathy for people in my everyday life. So I want things to be very clear cut. Like I want things to be black and white. And in Dragon Age, that never happens, like ever. So it's kind of funny to me that I love this game so much when I'm always like, oh, I want them to be bad or good. Austin is rolling his eyes at me.
Because I love that complication precisely because it's so real. Yeah. It makes the games feel very real to me. It makes them more immersive. It raises the stakes. That's precisely what I want. Like, and in games with faction systems, I want the same thing. I want complicated factions. I want to constantly be questioning the choice that I made. Is that because the way I play games, I do want to get I'm a peacemaker. I want to get the best possible outcome, which sounds almost contradictory based on what I just said, right? But I want to be challenged to get that outcome, and I want to be questioning myself and the decisions that I made. And so games with sympathetic villains and when it's not quite clear maybe who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, I'm very drawn to that.
Yeah, well, you're really gonna like Inquisition then. Like really.
I love it.
I was gonna say BioWare is the developer for you.
Yeah, sounds like it.
I feel
Between
like
BioWare and Bethesda, I've got my I've got my complicated stories.
BioWare's motto is actions have consequences.
Yeah, and I love that. Make me make a decision that I don't see the result of for 2 other games, and I'm like, hell yeah.
Yeah.
This is, sorry, spoilers for Mass Effect, but the one thing, the saving Malin's research data in Mass Effect 2 was the one that got me for its end result. Because it's such an insignificant, insignificant side quest that completely changes the entire galaxy.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so when I play Mass Effect 2, I need to do that.
It depends on who you feel sympathy for.
Okay, well, you'll have to help me then.
I'm going to tell you to go with your gut because I want you to experience the pain that we've all experienced.
Okay. Well, if you do that, then I'm just going to go look it up on the Mass Effect wiki.
Yeah, watch out. I went with my gut the first time I played Mass Effect, and boy, howdy, was 3 an experience. Whoa. Boy, did I make some interesting choices.
In Mass Effect 2, I had 2 squad mates survive the first time I played through it.
You beat me, because I was horrified by how many people I lost, and everybody was like, you lost 2? And I know. So, this time around I only lost 1, and it's made a world of difference. Yeah. But
that's why I got onto you when you called Vermeer the suicide mission.
Who, me?
Yes, because it's not the suicide mission.
I'm sorry. I don't know things.
It's okay, but that's a hard choice, though. I mean, there's hard choices to be made on Vermeer, and those choices have huge consequences across the whole game.
I'm trying to finish Mass Effect, but this podcast is making me only want to do Dragon Age. I'm gonna get to it, Austin. I promise.
All right.
Okay, do we want to talk about Ferelden culture?
Yeah.
Okay, I have a really fun codex entry that I'm about to read. So basically, Ferelden culture is really considered barbaric and uncivilized by, like, the rest of Thedas, especially Orlais and Tevinter, right? Like, they are on their high horses. Like, they think they're better than everyone else. So, of course, they're going to look down on Ferelden, especially, well, I mean, both of them, because Orlais conquers Ferelden for however long, and then Tevinter murders the number one most famous Ferelden of all time, Andraste. So, yeah, they're both going to have superiority complexes there.
I really think it's interesting that the two countries that have, like, one has a huge slave complex, like in industry in Tevinter, and the other one also had, most of which are elves. And in Orlais, they might not have slaves, but the way their class system works with the servants of the Orlesian families, they call Ferelden uncivilized.
Fair, but also, I mean, Ferelden and probably Ravain have the freest elves, right? So it's interesting that, you know, the two countries that would have the most unjust treatment of elves look down on the one who is maybe a little bit better in their treatment. I think that's interesting. That's a good point, Austin. Thank you for lifting that up. But anyway, so I think one of the biggest reasons why Ferelden culture is considered uncivilized is because for Fereldans, like, their biggest character trait that they hold dear is their freedom, which makes sense because they've been conquered so many times. But they're so committed to that freedom, you know, to everything. Their elves are more free. They don't have, you know, this strict class system like other places have, like Tevinter and Orlais. They have more freedom in, like, where they can travel, where they can live, especially for the poor people. Like, they can go to whatever land and work whatever land they want. And so that freedom, you see it run from the poorest of the poor all the way up to the most wealthy, to the king, to the monarch. And so I think that freedom, it really impacts every aspect of the culture in Ferelden, which I think is really interesting. And also, like, that freedom is a source of pride for them. And I think all of their culture is a source of pride with, you know, the dogs, all of that kind of imagery, the, like, dark, heavy kind of aesthetics of Ferelden. All of that is a source of pride and impacts who they are. So I have a codex entry that I wanted to read because I think it's hilarious. And this is a quote from Empress Selene in a letter to one of her ambassadors to Ferelden. This is what it says. There are a few things you can safely assume in dealing with these people. First, they value loyalty above all things, beyond wealth, beyond power, beyond reason. Second, although they have nothing in their entire country which you are likely to think at all remarkable, they are extremely proud of their accomplishments. Third, if you insult their dogs, they are likely to declare war. And finally, the surest sign that you have underestimated the Fereldans is that you think that you have come to understand them.
I'm laughing so much at the dogs.
I know. It's so true. It's so
I
true.
feel like this could be written by, like, any European country about the U.S.
Totally
Yeah,
agree.
really.
Yes.
You come from my dog.
It's so true. It's so
I think
true.
it's interesting the point she brings up, though, from a thing of like they value loyalty above everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the reasons why the nobles of the lands meet, at least in somewhat, turn against Logain. Because, it's a thing about like he wasn't loyal to Caitlin.
Right. To the Theron bloodline.
And there's a quest to the Theron bloodline, and there's questions on his loyalty at Ostagar.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what ultimately undoes him.
That's a really good point. It's a really good point.
Yes. But also now I'm just thinking about Barkspawn.
I love him.
I was told to name the dog Barkspawn as well.
See,
so
I always
did.
I always named the dog after my dog.
Yeah.
Because it feels immersive for me.
Cute.
That's adorable.
Okay, so talking about Ferelden culture, political systems are part of that. So what the heck is the difference between a Terran, a Ban, and an Arl? I wrote in my notes, a Terran, an Arl, and a Ban walk into a bar. I was trying to be clever. But anyway, so unlike most kingdoms, power is not exclusively with the nobility in Ferelden. We know that from the games. But power comes from the people, because a Ban, an Arl, and a Terran are kind of like the overseers. Like they're the feudal lords of the lands in Ferelden. And so if they don't have the support of the people that work their lands, also known as freeholders, then they're not going to own that land for very much longer. So that's really unique for Thedas. In Orlais, the nobles can do whatever the hell they want and treat their people like crap, and nothing will happen to them. Not so in Ferelden. So, and even the king is not, or queen is not, the unchallenged ruler. Anyone can challenge the king or queen in the lands meet. And for a long time, the nobility gathers to hold the lands meet annually, which they function as the official legislative body of Ferelden. And the lands meet's will can override the king or queen on any matter of law. So the lands meet is really the ultimate body in Ferelden, which I find very interesting, and I kind of like that. But it is kind of American, again, in that like governmental system. Like there's no one person who's unchallenged.
It's a very feudal system
Yeah.
of government from that. It reminds me of Skyrim's system of government with the moot and the High King of Skyrim basically holds very little power. And like they're not even present when you start the game. So
I know nothing about that. I'm sorry.
yeah. But it's also very like Game of Thrones, which we can say like
Sure.
Dragon Age Origins very much pulls from Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, all of these fantasy things, and like you have all these houses of Westeros, and there is a king, but as the show and books have proven, that does not mean that all of those houses have to obey the king.
Right. Yeah, and the same is true, I think, in Ferelden. So you have a bunch of different kinds of nobles. So at the top, obviously, you have the king or the queen. And then right under that, you have prince and princess. Obviously, that's like all together in my brain. And then the first under the royal, those are the royal family. Under that, the highest noble title is a Terran. And there are only two Terniers left in Ferelden, and that is the Ternier of Highever. So if you play a human in Dragon Age Origins, that's where you're from. And The other one is Gwarin, and Loghain is the Tevinter of Gwarin. Until he either dies or becomes a Grey Warden. I'm not really sure what happens to it after that.
So, I have a question. Do the Kuzlins become, like, do they inherit the Terran or whatever after Hal is displaced?
Yeah, it's implied heavily that it goes back to your family if you play that origin. And I think if it's also kind of implied that whatever origin you pick, all the other origins, they all die. But I think that the sibling in that origin, so there's an older brother who goes to fight in Ostagar, he supposedly survives. So he rules that Tevinter if
you're not a Kuzlin.
Right. So that still exists. And I really don't know anything about Gwarin other than Loghain was the Tevinter of it for a while. I should have looked that up, but alas. Anyway, so after Terran is Arl or Arlessa, and after that is Ban. And a Ban and an Arl are very similar. I think the difference is like an Arl typically has a little bit more land than a Ban might have. And it's basically a feudal lord. And then again, after that is Lord, Lady, and Knight. Those are all pretty basic. But we already talked about freeholders. They're like regular people who work the land, earn income from working that land. And they swear allegiance to a Ban or an Arl. Those Bans and Arls, sometimes Bans will swear allegiance to an Arl. Not always. But a Ban and an Arl, they will always swear allegiance to the Terran of their area. They don't have to. There are a bunch like in the middle of Ferelden that don't necessarily swear allegiance to anyone. But the ones that are, close to Highever or close to Gwarin, they would probably swear allegiance to the ones that they're close to. So it's very similar to a feudal system. And when you play Awakening, which is the big DLC for Origins, and you become basically like the Arl of Amaranthine. And so you have all these bands, all these nobles coming to you like, okay, I need you to send me gold for this. I need you to send me soldiers to protect me from the Darkspawn. I need you to do this for me. So you really get this picture of like, all these people have sworn to you and they are constantly asking you for things. So your job is really to protect them. And you really, really get that picture in Awakening. Austin, you haven't played Awakening yet, so you wouldn't know that.
I have started Awakening. I did the little party that you have that they're like, oh, welcome the new like warden commander, like meet all the nobles. And I told the guy to send him away because I was annoyed.
Oh my God. You kicked them all out.
Yeah.
They're going to be mad at you.
I know.
That's hilarious.
Also, my dwarf's cunning is like 50, so I'll be fine.
Okay. Well, that's, other than like the notable Fereldans and our character for today, that's all I have about Ferelden. So unless you guys have any thoughts or questions that are left unanswered.
Well, let's break here and then we'll do our little middle of the show and then go into our characters.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
Yeah.
All right. So, as always, you can find us on the Twitter at Dragon Age Lorecast or on the Discord in the Robots Radio Discord, which you can find in the description. Fire, where can we find you and what are you doing?
Sure. I am all over the place. You can find me on Twitter as FyreWriter. That's with a Y. FYRE writer. And then you can find the Pixel People podcast also on Twitter at Pixel People Pod. Let's see, where else do I hang out? I am I am on Discord as well. I'm also in Robots Discord, and I have my own Discord as well, Campfire. And I'm on Twitch. Took a little hiatus, just life was a little crazy for a bit there, so just took a step back, to kind of recalibrate, as one of my favorite characters might say. And but returning shortly. And trying to think where else I'm at, because I know I'm in other places too, but I'm drawing a blank at the moment. So those are the main places to find me, though.
And if you really like when we highlight characters at the end of the show, you should definitely check out the Pixel People, because that's all they do is highlight NPCs and other characters in games, and it's a great podcast.
Thanks.
So yeah.
I have a good time. It's really fun. I love it's basically it's my excuse to talk to fun people about my favorite things, which is characters and games, and I just so happen to record it. So it is a mostly selfish endeavor.
All right. So if you would like to support our podcast, you can, as of now, just come up and give us a review on Apple Podcasts. That's the best way to support the podcast right now. If you enjoy what we do, tell us about it, and we'll read your review on the podcast. So yeah, anything you want to add, Shelby?
I don't think so. Sorry.
All right. Well, that's okay. Let's get into the rest of the episode.
Yes. Okay, so the last thing I brought is just a few notable Fereldans. So you have Alistair, everyone's favorite nice guy in Origins. And then you have Kaylin.
An actual nice
like
guy.
Actually, yeah, not like a bro. Like
sarcastic
actually.
Hashtag nice guy.
Like actually, he is very kind.
Let me spring to Alistair's defense.
And then there's Honora, and then there's Cullen Rutherford, who has a real big comeback in Inquisition. Let's see, Cole, everyone's favorite. We don't know what he is. And then there's Hawk, originally from Ferelden. I don't know if Hawk would consider themselves, it probably depends on your character, but my Hawk would probably consider themselves from the Free Marches, since they've now spent most of their life there. Anyways.
Well, that's not even true, because they're an adult by the time they get. They are an adult.
I guess
by the time
that's
they get
true.
to Kirkwall.
Yeah, but they're 18, very young adult. They have so much of their formative experience.
Maybe.
You think they're older than that?
I do think they're older than that. You
Why?
know what? The Dragon Age. Someone tweet us and tell me how old Hawk is.
Okay.
Just so we can know.
Okay. Anyways.
But I would just say my Hawk would consider themselves Ferelden.
Okay, that's
because there's a lot of conversations that you can have, and there's a lot of options you can give. Like, Ferelden will always be my home.
That's true.
And there's a lot of things like, yes, Hawk is the champion of Kirkwall, but almost every interaction are like, you're a Ferelden.
Mm-hmm. That's a fair point. I will take that back.
Right.
Hawk is a Ferelden.
And no one really no one really says you're an Amel. You know?
Yeah.
Like, Leandra is an Amel, but they don't really consider Hawk one of them.
That's fair. You're right. You are correct. Moving on. We also have Loghain, and there's Nathaniel Howe, who is a fan favorite. And, of course, there's also Sarah, who a lot of people... She's a very controversial character.
I like her.
I know you do. She annoys me. See, we're divided. So those are some notable Fereldans. Oh, and I forgot to mention, also Liliana. She has an Orlesian accent. Obviously, she spent most of her formative years in Orlais, but her mom was Ferelden, and she considers herself to be Ferelden. So.
Also, Connor, our Eamon's
Yes.
son, would be another one to put up there.
That's true.
Big and you can see him in later games.
You can. That's true.
Yeah.
And there are so many more, but those are just some important ones.
All right. So, for our last little bit, since we do like to highlight a character, and we have Fyre with us, we thought, let's let Fyre do it.
Yeah.
So, who would you like to talk about today?
Well, I decided to go ahead and bring Alistair. He is the one that I know best. And, yeah.
I love Alistair.
Guy. He was my romance. Talk about your fan favorites.
Yeah, well, just tell us a little bit about him.
All right. Well, let's see. We've covered a lot of him just in the basic, just going through the story of Fereldan. I think he's an interesting character who I think is really kind of underestimated sometimes by the fandom. Mm-hmm. He's often portrayed as kind of a, I hate the word, but himbo,
yes,
which I think is very unfair.
Yes. Yes, he is not a himbo. He's very intelligent.
He's not a himbo.
He just has no
and I mean, he says hilarious things. Yeah. I mean, for quite a while, I had a,
My favorite thing that happens with Alistair, and this is just, this is a developer thing because they didn't really put this together, but you can have a conversation with him to just be like, okay, I'm going to make you and Honora king and queen and you're going to get married. And then you get into like the last scene and you say, Alistair and Honora will rule together. And Alistair's just like, wait, what? No one told me this. Like, what? We just talked about and there's the famous scene where, like, in the scene with Connor, he's like, I don't want to like suggest killing a child, but he's an abomination. And then later he's like, I can't believe you killed Connor, and I'm like, you told me to.
So unfair.
But I think that's just developer
he's so
thing.
Funny, yeah. I love his. He was interesting because when it comes to romancing characters, he is definitely not the type that I usually pick. But for my play style, he made the most sense. When I was initially coming into the game, I was kind of joking like, hey guys, who am I going to want to romance in this? And what people were actually telling me was Morrigan. But I wound up spending like no time with Morrigan because she hated literally everything I did. Whereas he was just a little more like, oh, that's so cool. I love you. I was kind of like, okay, well, I love you too. But it's interesting though, some of the things that that you have to kind of go through with him, and if you don't take the right steps, you can't get the right endings. And the whole idea of that you have to harden him to kind of get a better outcome and to, I don't know, make him, I guess, hardened, but that's not really the word I want to use, to just tone down his idealism, I guess. He comes into it pretty idealistic with a lot of ideas about the way things should be, and they're not. That's just not how the world works, and that's a pretty hard lesson for anybody to learn, and you kind of have to be the one to give it to him. And it's interesting thing about this game, it's like you're presented with just this mile-long list of dialogue choices, and you've got to pick the right one out of like 7 or 8. Otherwise, you're not going to get what you want. And I think that was a really interesting mechanic there, because it's pretty easy to screw up and keep your idealistic Alistair, who is going to wind up not accomplishing anything. I also think that just within the game, he's put into some really questionable and problematic scenarios. There was one where, at the encouragement of my of the folks in my stream, we wound up having a threesome with somebody, and he was not super into it, and I felt really bad. I was like, I'm so sorry for talking you into this. This was not okay.
Wait, was this to do the dark ritual with Morrigan?
No, with Isabella.
No, this was.
Oh, yeah.
Because if he's
right.
hardened, you can talk him into it. Which is so sad. Like, ooh.
I know. I was just like, this is really sketchy, and I feel really bad for doing this. I mean, and of course it's, it's kind of played as kind of funny, but it's like, is it really funny though?
Yeah.
And then, and we in my game, the Dark Ritual did happen, and that was another point where I'm just like, I'm watching the screen like, oh, this is awful. Oh my God, what have I done? This is horrible. I'm so sorry. And just that he's put into those positions. This poor character who just doesn't quite get the respect he deserves, and I think that's really part of it too, that even if you romance him and can keep him by your side throughout the whole time, in some ways you are kind of forced to treat him like a pawn at certain points, and I think that speaks to kind of that complexity that I was talking about earlier, where it's like, I want my character to be good, but my character's doing some pretty crummy things, and I mean, that's an understatement. Like, that's some pretty evil things, I think, in my opinion. And yeah, poor Alistair. But I love him to pieces. I love his banter. That was one of the favorite parts of the game for me, was just every time I'm walking and two of them start talking to each other, it's like I stop everything because I want to listen to what they're going to say.
Yes.
And he has just some of the funniest exchanges with people. It's delightful.
Yeah, his lines with Wynn are hilarious. My favorite.
I had a lot of that
sure.
because he, Wynn, and Liliana were my dream team throughout most of the
squad.
games.
That's
So.
a good squad. I love Alistair's, especially if you harden him, because he goes from he's a very passive character, like you see, and that and by passive I mean a lot of things are done to him. He doesn't really initiate. He reacts to the things that are done to him, but most of his story are other people doing things to him.
Yeah.
But if you harden him and do this, it is kind of like a moment in especially when he says, "No, I want to be king." Him actually standing up and saying "No, I can do this. It's time for me to do this." Because I think one of my favorite dialogues is it's the very beginning when you get to Lothering and Morrigan being Morrigan's self, just like, "Hey, Alistair, aren't you the senior Grey Warden? Why aren't you leading?" And Alistair's just like, leading's not for me. But that journey of moving, and if you leave him with the Wardens, he's hardened, you kind of get to see the payoff of that a little more up close in the later games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
That's a good point.
Never forget, swooping is bad.
Swooping is bad. That's in our intro.
For a while, I had it as a sound cue on my.
Yeah, it's a hilarious quote. Did y'all know there is a Cards Against Humanity reference to that line?
Yes. I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, "Oh, that's what that means."
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I had no idea that that's what that was referenced.
It just says swooping. Yeah.
It's hilarious.
It's like, for the longest time when I played Cards Against Humanity, what is
swooping?
What does that mean?
Who
Swooping.
swoops?
It's like,
I really would. So this is a little spoilery. Sorry for Inquisition, but I really if you do one quest before a certain quest with the Grey Wardens, you have the potential of, and Alistair is your Grey Warden. You have a potential of Alistair and Morrigan being in your place at the same time.
Ooh.
which hasn't happened since Origins. Same thing with, the Lyanna is there, but I never get any dialogue between Morrigan and Alistair, and they would Morrigan couldn't come and not poke fun at this man.
Well, if you do the ritual, he gets to meet his son.
Aw.
Oh, wow.
That's cute.
Oh, my goodness.
So when you get to that, this is alright. And get to Inquisition. Well, I guess you wouldn't get to see it because Alistair wasn't king, so he would be a warden. He'd be a warden, wouldn't he? For you.
I believe so.
I think so.
Yeah.
So make sure you do the Winter Palace quest before you do the quest with the Grey Wardens.
I will try to remember that.
Yeah, people will.
And if I forget, I know somebody in my stream will be like, "Hold up, what you doing? Go do this first." And I'll be like, "Okay."
All right.
Just tell me what to do.
Anything else about Alistair other than the fact that we love him?
Yes, we do get to meet his actual mother.
Oh yeah.
In the later games.
That'll be interesting.
She's really interesting.
She's more interesting in the books.
Yes.
Just saying.
But yes. So the book The Calling, you get to meet his mother. And she's in Inquisition.
Briefly.
Cool.
Briefly. Well, more depending on what you choose.
Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all we have for this week. Thank you, Fyre, for being on this podcast and coming and giving this a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks so much. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Well, we'll see you next week on the Dragon Age Lorecast. Wait, no, we won't see you next week on the Dragon Age Lorecast because we're going to take a break. Remember?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We will be breaking a week for just timing-wise, so we won't be putting out an episode after this one. Then we'll have a week break before we're back again. So, yeah. We'll see you next time on the Dragon Age Lorecast. There, now I can edit everything around it.
Yes. We're going to a wedding.
All right. To the Dragon Age Lorecast. As always, you can find us on Twitter at DA Lorecast. If you have any lore questions, topics to unpack, or side character suggestions, email them to us at dalorecast@gmail.com. The Dragon Age Lorecast is a part of the Robots Radio Rocket Club. You can join the Robots Radio Network Discord by clicking the link in our episode description. If you enjoyed our show, we'd love it if you'd subscribe and give us a review. See you next time.
Do you love Dragon Age? Have you always wanted to learn more about its vast world and detailed lore? Are you still attached to your hero of Ferelden, even a decade after Dragon Age Origins came out? Or maybe you're a newer fan, still discovering a new tidbit or quest every day.
Well, either way, the Dragon Age Lorecast is the podcast for you. I'm Austin, also known as Teacup.
And I'm Shelby, also known as She-Cup.
And come and join us as we embark on a journey to explore and discover all things Dragon Age.
We'll discuss all kinds of topics, from Lyrium to the Chantry and the great mysteries of the old gods, and even more that even you BioWare superfans might not know about.
So come and listen on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast. And always remember,
swooping